Hey YouTube, Poops Lag here, and this is TurboFat, an open source Godot puzzle game I made. Source code's linked below if you want to check it out. But I started developing this game back in February of 2020, and it just released on Steam in October this year. So this video is going to talk about the last few months leading up to the release, the Steam release process, and then the few little fixes and hurdles that came up after that. So I hope you'll stick around. So I wanted a fun, flashy end-of-level results screen. A lot of puzzle games will say like, oh, you beat the level and you get 3 stars or whatever. That doesn't quite work for TurboFat because the grading system is so granular. It goes from like B minus to S, S plus, and there's a million grades in between. So what I came up with instead is this bar graph where it pops up a receipt at the end of a level, and these bars slowly grow, filling up and showing you how many points you got in different categories. And then Fat Sensei stamps it with your grade at the end and gives you a 1-up if you earned it. And so you can see it shows you like, oh, here's all the grades you got. It sort of feels good to watch it go up. And then here's one grade you didn't get. So next time, maybe try to get more combos, for example, and if you just bridge that gap a little bit, you'll get the triple S you're going for. So the old grading system I had for giving players like an S or an A grade was based on like a task of the game, just playing perfectly and never dropping their combo, and then saying, well, if you've got 60% of the task, that's an A or whatever. So I changed it so that instead now every level just has a hard-coded number, like 1850 or whatever, and I can adjust that based on this statistical analysis tool, which compares my scores to the task scores, and I can figure out, yeah, okay, let's cut the player some slack on this level and just manually fudge the numbers. So I wanted the player to feel really excited when they finally reach a boss level, so I added all these little extras. Now a goal message pops up and the path that you're on flashes all these rainbowy colors. The music changes to this one really hype tune from the soundtrack, and then the boss button itself is all sparkly and decorated with rainbows and stuff, so I think it'll get the player really excited about the level. So the end of level results screen used to have some gameplay hints show up at the bottom, but when I redid the screen, those went away. So I moved those over to the adventure mode's level select, and now there's a hint there instead. I also got rid of the save scum prevention code where I used to detect if you go to start a level in adventure mode and then you quit because you did a bad job, you shouldn't get a second chance. But I thought, like, if they really want to save scum, let them save scum. I'm not going to stop you guys. So I also added analog stick support with this analog event translator script I wrote. It detects when the analog stick moves outside of a predefined dead zone, and when it does, it creates a D-pad button input event and passes that event to the rest of the game through this parse input event method. The cool thing about this approach is this is the only part of my game that even knows about analog sticks. Everybody else can just handle the same D-pad inputs they were already handling. So I tried to check off a bunch of checkboxes that people recommend when marketing a game, like video ads for YouTube, setting up Google ads, going through like the wish lists things on Fiverr and stuff people will do for you. This Twitter countdown thing where when your game's 2 weeks from release, you say like it's out in 2 weeks, and then when your game's a week from release, you keep blasting people every few days, just letting them know it's out soon, it's out now. So I did that. Overall, I'm not sure how well any of that stuff worked. I think most of the people who ended up buying the game were people who knew me or like my friends and stuff, so I'm grateful for that. But marketing's hard. If you don't have that kind of group, then I think it's even harder. So release day is very anxiety inducing when you're your own QA team. I tested the game for about 12 hours the day before release to make sure it worked for me. But just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for everybody else. Because I could have, weird dev stuff installed or who knows. So I passed it off to some friends also, and I gave them access to the Steam beta branch, and they tested it. And that's about all I can do, right? So that I pulled the lever and released it. And the good news is it did work for everybody. The bad news is like there was a lot of feedback as far as the game being like too confusing or not understanding what they were supposed to be doing, it being too difficult, or the worst was like people having bugs or crashes. So but really, the core of it comes down to like, if you're like me, you'll play a game on Steam that hooks you, and you'll play it for 100 to 200, 500 hours, and like you'll never say anything about it. I've never really praised, Balatro on its forums, been like, oh, this is a fun game, and I love it. No notes. You always go on there when something's not working or something sucks or something's too hard, and that's when you complain about it. So I guess my point is on release day there's just a lot of negative voices, and that tends to be all you hear for a very long time. So it's hard to deal with. The other half of this is just sort of like the nature of how software bugs work, where Game Dev Tycoon simulates this in an adorable way, where as you're adding new features to the game, your bugs go up, and then when you're done, bugs go down until you hit the release button, and then you just wait until there's 0 bugs and then you release, right? But in the real world, as you're finding these bugs during development, if you're not, lazy or inept or just whatever, you're fixing the bugs. So people will say, "Oh, this thing doesn't work, this thing breaks," and you'll just fix it along the way. Um, But then when you release your game, you get all these new players, and they're all going to find this new stuff. It's just there's no helping it. There's going to be some guy who's running your game at on 4 monitors at once, running Arch Linux in Hungarian and whatever. You can't catch everything. It's just kind of sucks. So I really wanted to get to the bottom of these random crashes. They affected some players more than others, but they weren't in response to any specific thing they were doing. It was just every once in a while the game would crash. I am used to handling these things in Java with stuff like stack traces and logging, and those tools don't really work for Godot. There's no stack traces, and by default, if you log a message and then the game crashes, those logs don't get printed because Godot does not flush its output buffers on a crash. So I'd already had some stability issues with the Steam Godot API. Specifically, on startup, I used to call get achievement over and over for all the achievements in my game just to see if the player had already unlocked them and get the status, and that caused the game to crash pretty reliably, like 25% of the time. So I worked around that already by spacing out my calls and not making them too quickly and being like, okay, I'll wait a little while before I make my next Steam call. But the author of Godot Steam suggested, you know what? The precompiles are a lot more reliable. You should be using those instead. And they patched the precompiles for this specific issue in addition, so it really shouldn't cause a problem. So I was like, thanks so much. I'm now using those, but just in case, I added one extra step of a facade for the Steam APIs, where if my game knows like, oh, they're playing this level, I need to check, did they already unlock this achievement? The facade will possibly have already retrieved the answer before, and it'll just say like, I already know the answer to that. Here, I don't need to reach out to Steam for that. So overall, I hope that at least if nothing else, it reduces the number of round trips to Steam. So it's still a good practice, even if that had nothing to do with the crashes. Lastly, I had some players report that achievements were just getting randomly unlocked, where I would tell Steam the player is 31.4% done with the story mode. And then Steam would say, 31.4%? That's my favorite number. Here, have an achievement. And the problem was that Steam just sometimes, like most of the time for most players, it would respect the number that you give it. And then just like 1% of the time, it would turn 31.7% into like 7.8 trillion. It would just come up with a huge ass number. And so I just disabled progress statistics. I couldn't work around that bug. I don't think it's a bug in my game. It really just seems to be a bug in how Steam or the APIs work. So the last two things I thought could maybe be causing problems. One was threaded loading. Godot has a bug where if you ever connect a listener not on the main thread, it can sometimes randomly crash. So I disabled all threaded loading in my game. The result is it's a little bit slower to start up. It takes like an extra second or two because it's not using multiple threads, but hopefully that makes it more stable. The last thing was my game had stuff like this wallpaper, which would be the same when you switch scenes. So when it goes one scene to the next, the wallpaper keeps all of its stuff in the same place. And you can't in Godot just say like, here, you use this wallpaper. So instead what it was doing was it was like hiding it in a secret place where Godot wouldn't look for it when it was cleaning up. And then the new the new scene that was loading would like grab that wallpaper from that secret place. So I thought that was kind of dicey, and I was like, let's come up with a better way to do this. Instead, now it's just using auto load singletons more traditionally, where there's just a wallpaper that's always in memory, and if a scene needs it, it makes it visible, and if it doesn't, it becomes invisible. So all those things seem to have helped. People are not reporting crashes anymore, but the bad news is I still see the game crash like every month or so, and it breaks my heart every time. 'Cause I'm always like, dang, I really thought I got to the bottom of this, but yeah, maybe it'll just crash forever. There are some issues in Godot like 85692 where it's just like, yeah, the game crashes once in a while, and this might be like that where it's just something out of my hands. So while I was trying to get to the bottom of these crashes that were only affecting some players, I realized if you go to the command line and run the game, then those printing messages are reliable. It's just the logging that falls behind. So I made this troubleshooting batch file based on Slay the Spire. They had something similar where like you would run it, it would activate this flag to tell the game to print more messages, and then after the game was closed, it would say like send this part to the developers. So I didn't like copy and paste it, but I used all those same ideas. And it worked great. The only drawback was as was printing the messages, if you had a selection in the window, it would cause the game to freeze. And I figured out that only happens if it's trying to print while you have a selection. It didn't affect Slay the Spire because Slay the Spire never printed messages while the game was running. It always printed it on startup and then after the game was closed. So I realized I could do that. There is a flag in Godot to flush the output buffer on print, meaning like uh, as messages are being logged, flush the buffer right away. And that was honestly the flag I needed all along. So that made everything way easier and way more reliable. I could use the logs again. I didn't have to use the console. I kept this batch file though because it still does enable this flag to print extra messages, and it tells the player where the logs are. So I made the tutorials easier in a few ways. The first is I got rid of most of the randomization where like it used to always give you the same 3 pieces, but in a different order. For example, I don't shuffle them anymore because sometimes the order was kind of mean. The second is I give players hints earlier in the tutorial when they mess up. So if you can't figure something out, they'll be like, hey, by the way, the white piece goes in the middle or something like that. And the last is if you keep messing up, they'll just do the tutorial for you. They'll just show you like, hey, if you can't figure this out here, here's how I would do it. I'll put this there, and then they'll let you do it again after they show you how it should be done. And the cool news is I had one player who got stuck in a new tutorial who then said like I tried it again and I got through it and I figured out what I was missing. So it felt good. I also tweaked adventure mode in a few ways based on player feedback. The first is on startup now. If you've never played adventure mode before, it gives you some instructions. I thought for the most part it was pretty intuitive and you can figure it out as you played, but not everybody thought this was fun. So yeah, it tells you how to play now. The second is if you ever go to like restart or quit a puzzle, it used to just be like that counts, you lost, but now it warns you. It says like, hey man, you're about to quit, but this is adventure mode. You only get one try. Do you really want to quit? The last is if you play all 6 of your levels and then get to the boss level, it used to just say like, well, time's up, try again tomorrow, but now it lets you play the boss level, and I think that's just sort of it's sensible. It should have always done that. So about 2 or 3 years ago when I first started showcasing this game to the Tetris community and stuff, people were like, I see what you're trying to do, but please, I need a hold piece. I need line pieces. This game's too hard. Please make it easier. So that was already in the game, but it was in the settings menu and it was buried under like a section called cheats. And so it was sort of obtuse and hard to find and probably not the nicest way to present it. So I changed that now on startup. It'll ask you like, hey, you haven't played this game before. What difficulty do you want? Do you want line pieces? That's fine. Just and it calls it like helpers, so you know, like you don't need this. Maybe turn this off later once you get used to the game. Each save slot also now has these sections independently, so you can play through the game, change to a new save slot, and maybe make it harder for your second playthrough or something like that. So that's it for November. TurboFat's out for sale. It's on Steam. People bought it. It's getting good reviews and stuff. Now, there is feedback that the game is too hard, but the achievement data sort of defies that. It says 10% of people have beaten the last level of the game, which is insane. I thought the game was harder than that. I thought it was only going to be like 5%. But yeah, the other half of that is like, I thought, okay, well, maybe 10% of people beat it, but they beat it by lowering the difficulty. So 2.5% of people have broken 100 combo. And that's an insane accomplishment. I don't think you can really appreciate that unless you've played the game yourself, but 100 combo means basically dropping 200 pieces flawlessly and never making a mistake. Like, you can't have a misdrop out of 200 pieces, and that's insane. So, no matter what your metric, there is seemingly a niche who's found TurboFat and is playing it and is really good at it. So, if you're in that niche, thanks so much for giving it a shot. I think some people are going to wonder, like, so how'd the game do? How much money did you make? That was like the first question my mom asked, right? But I didn't really look at those numbers yet. I guess I looked at my bank account, and it's not like 8 digits or whatever, so it didn't make me rich. But game dev it's like a marathon, right? It's like when someone finishes a marathon, you don't ask like, oh, did you win the marathon? What place did you get? For most people, it's just about like, I finished a marathon, man. It was an accomplishment. So that's how I feel. I feel like TurboFat was a huge project. It took me like 4 or 5 years. I'm really proud I finished it. I'm really proud at how many people are enjoying the game. And you know, obviously, I wish it could be better. I wish more people liked it. I wish whatever. But I'm really happy I finished it. It just feels so good. So I'm gonna have one more video summarizing my overall thoughts and stuff. But until then, thanks so much for watching. If the game looks cool and you haven't bought it, go check it out on Steam and see what you think. And I guess I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.